applause, and certainly our thanks to you all. Wow, that's a great group. Thank you so much to each and every one of you for being here. I want to recognize some special men and women in our audience as well. The future of our military and our country simply does not lie with us old retired folks, as they say, but rather with the young people who recognize the importance of national service and are certainly willing to step up every single day. Certainly adults who may have encouraged them along the way, parents, teachers, maybe their coach said, hey, get involved, a minister, a neighbor, it doesn't much matter who it might have been, but just to let them know how important it is. And as we'll hear later, today, believe it or not, less than 10%, that's right, less than 1 out of every 10 young men or women, youth of service age, know anything about the military or, for that matter, have any interest in serving their country. So one of our NDBS emphasis efforts is to invite as many young people as we can to come to these events so they can meet and understand what's going on, so they can serve and participate in the discussion of important issues in our country. And tonight, I'm most pleased, very proud to say that we have over 30 cadets from various schools around the area, including Civil Air Patrol, Air Force Junior ROTC cadets, and Sea cadets. So, if you're a cadet, or a parent, or an instructor, or simply someone who influenced these young men and women, please stand right now and let's give you all a well-deserved collective round of applause.
Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started with the rest of our program. So I know you're in the middle of your meal. Please continue, enjoy your meal, and enjoy dessert. But we have a lot to cover, and we want to get started. So I'm John Campbell. I'm the Vice President of the National Defense Briefing Series. It's going to be my pleasure tonight, excuse me, to introduce our speakers and talk a little bit about our program. And then moderate the discussion. So as Scott said, our next program is going to be on January 25th. It'll be the annual presentation of our Defender of Freedom Award. It's going to be a great event. And as Scott talked, we're not quite ready to make the big reveal yet, but I think you're going to be pleased with it. After that, we're back into what I call our aspirational list of programs we want to cover. And in fact, tonight's program is actually the first of a three-part series where we talk about what we envision the position of the United States in the world in 2049, 25 years. Now, we picked 2049 because that's the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party. It's important to them, so it ought to be important to us. If 25 years seems like a long way in the future, remember that it took 25 years from concept to hardware for the F-35. It takes 10 years to build an aircraft carrier. We can only build one at a time. So if we're going to be ready for 2049, the time to start is right now. So tonight we're going to talk about the future of the all-volunteer force. As I said, this is sort of a three-parter. In the spring, we're going to come back, double back, and talk about America in 2049. What's our vision for the world? Where do we want to be in it, and how do we want to position ourselves? And that will lead to a program in the summer of next year to talk about, given our vision for where we want to be, what sort of military force we need, and how do we afford it? We have a couple of other programs we've had on the back burner for a while. We'll eventually get to them. That I think will be interesting given the environment we're in today, the role of drones and collaborative combat aircraft in combat and of course artificial intelligence and its role in warfighting. So if any of you have suggestions for topics you'd like to hear, if you catch any of us, any of the officers, we'll be more than happy to see if we can work to those. So as always tonight, we'll have our Q&A session at the end, same as we usually do. You can either email questions to that email address up there, and it will be up on the screen during our discussion. There should be 3x5 index cards on the table. You can write your question down, hold them up, and we'll get a runner to come pick them up. Or we'll have a live Q&A session, and if you'd like to ask a question in person, hold your hand up. We'll get you a microphone, and please wait till we get the microphone because we're videotaping this. And we want to make sure we capture your question for the videotape. We almost always have more questions than we can handle, so if we don't get to yours, we're sorry. If you want to send them to me via email, and we can, we'll try to answer those and get back to you. So our program tonight is entitled "The Future of the All-Volunteer Force." You probably know that the All-Volunteer Force was instituted after the end of the Vietnam War 51 years ago. By any measure I can think of, it's been successful. It's produced probably the best quality military in the world. It served us through the waning days of the Cold War. It served us through the short-duration, high-intensity operations in Desert Storm and prolonged low-intensity operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. While the emphasis is now shifting back to a global military confrontation with potential major regional conflicts, there's still no reason to think that the all-volunteer force would not continue to perform superbly, just as it's done for the last 50 years. There are, however, some storm clouds on the horizon. I want to take a couple of slides here and just set the scene for the discussion we're going to have. This is a look at the recruiting results in FY23, which ended in September of 23. And you'll notice that except for the Marine Corps and the Space Force, congratulations, Marine Corps, all the services fell well short of their goals. And I would invite you to take a look at notice the Army numbers there. Recruited 55,000 recruits with a goal of 65,000, so they were 10,000 short. But just keep that number in mind because we'll come back to it. So in FY24, which was just completed, all the services made their goal. And that was due to a lot of hard work and some things that the services did to do a better job recruiting. I do want to call your attention to the Army number. If you recall, in 23, they recruited 55,000 against a goal of 65,000. In 24, they just lowered their goal to 55,000. So you got to give them credit for creativity, but they did make their goal. So a lot of good work there. My hat's off to the Army and the Navy, actually, because they've started a future soldier and sailor prep course, which takes the kids who are not quite up to speed, either the physical fitness or academically, puts them through a pre-basic boot camp and gets them ready to go. And you might say, well, they've lowered their standards, but the reality is, and Admiral Beale can probably talk to this, in the Navy, the kids that do that lead the pack in basic training. So it gets them into the groove and acclimates them with what they're going to do. So that's good news, and the services and the recruiting services are being congratulated for that good news. But I will tell you that every single service person who speaks to these numbers said, yeah, we made our numbers this year, but we got a lot of headwind. The goals are probably going to go up, and the societal trends that cause our problems are going to continue in the wrong direction. Next slide. So I put together, these are just some things we can talk about later. They'll probably come up in the discussion. Scott mentioned that less than 10% of the kids today, I'll come back, 23% of the kids today are all that are eligible to serve. They have physical problems, physical fitness problems, past medical problems, legal issues, drug use, that sort of thing. So only 23% of the kids of service age today are qualified to serve. As Scott said, the more alarming factor to me is that only 9% of the kids by survey in that Gen Z recruiting audience have any inclination to serve. Now, the recruiters call that propensity, which means inclination to serve. They either have no interest in serving, or more frequently, they just don't know anything about the military. They have all sorts of strange notions about what the military is about. And part of the reason is that they've never met a veteran, they've never talked to anybody who served, and for them, and for much of America, service is something that's done by somebody else. And one of the byproducts of the all-volunteer force is that we have this increasingly small and insular caste of military professionals that's separated from the rest of America. And while all-volunteer force is a wonderful thing, that's maybe an unintended consequence. There are lots of factors in the problem. Some environmental factors like low unemployment, which makes competition for kids greater. Surprising thing to me, the cohort of 18-year-olds in 2026 is going to be 10% smaller than normal, and the reason is that financial crisis of 2008, many young couples put off starting a family, and that demographic rolls forward and will hit us in 2026. On the societal side, I think you probably would resonate with most of these. In general, there's more of a distrust in the institutions of government. The military, as it always has the most trust. However, it's trending downhill. A thing that comes up inevitably in these discussions is the extremism in the military, either the right wing or more frequently the woke and weak argument for military. I would just tell you that surveys of the Gen Zers say that's not a problem for them because that's the society that they grew up in. It is a problem, though, for the moms and dads and teachers and coaches and many of us who are the influencers for those kids. So if we think it's a problem, then it's a problem. So the panel, the panel this evening will look at, discuss some of the causes and near-term solutions and their views on how they see this problem from where they sit. And they've got unique perspectives. We may look at some models that other countries use if we have time, and there's some interesting trends there. The big question for us tonight, though, is the all-volunteer force as we know it today sustainable through that period that we're looking at? So our two speakers tonight are uniquely qualified to discuss our topic. Admiral Woody Beale flew A-6E intruders and FA-18s and commanded at all levels in the Navy before he was promoted to Rear Admiral. In his final assignment, he was a deputy commander of the U.S. Navy Recruiting Command, where he came face-to-face with the force protection, marketing, and demographic challenges facing the Navy today. A dedicated aviator and patriot, he remains connected with the U.S. Navy's executive leadership and is currently an A320 captain with American Airlines. Mike Riley is an associate professor of practice at Texas A&M University's Bush School of Government and Public Service, where he instructs graduate and undergraduate students in Homeland Security, Homeland Defense, and intelligence-related courses. During Colonel Riley's 29-year military career in the Marine Corps, he served as an infantry officer, intelligence officer, and planner in all three Marine Expeditionary Forces, as well as assignments at U.S. Indo-PACOM, Defense Intelligence Agency, and the National Security Agency. I don't normally contribute to these discussions, but for the last year and a half, I've been leading a task force for the Air and Space Forces Association on the recruiting challenges. So I've become a little bit familiar with the problem. So I may comment if I can't help myself. So Admiral Beale, we'll start off with you. If you come to the stage for your remarks, and then Colonel Riley, and then we'll start our Q&A session. Thank you, John. Thanks, Woody. Appreciate it. All right.
Man, I hate it when the microphone is stuck somewhere and I can't move around. So for you on the video camera in the back, if I'm moving around too much, give me a high sign or something. Hey folks, good evening. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me to speak a few words. I do want to express some gratitude here. I think it's appropriate that we once again express gratitude to our elected officials in the audience for the veterans and for the military and for the spouses of those veterans and military and our first responders. I want to say thank you to you all as well. That's only appropriate as we start a discussion like this. I want to open it up with a couple of ground rules. The first thing is I'm going to tell you the truth tonight, okay? And sometimes telling you the truth I'm going to be blunt, and it's going to be baked into my remarks. So while I try to be plain-spoken and polite, if I hurt your feelings, I'm sorry about that, but I'm not going to be responsible for it, okay? All right. The second one is, I'm not a question dodger. So if you have good questions tonight, I want to hear them. And I promise that I'll answer them to the best of my ability. I will not be a matador and say "Olé" and let the question run right by. All right. My thesis as we talk about the all-volunteer force is not only that it's sustainable, and I think it is, but it's fundamental and necessary to our nation. Our nation should inspire an all-volunteer force, and maintaining that inspiration is a top-down leadership responsibility. From the president on down through our country's leaders, we all have the responsibility to maintain and sustain a properly manned, trained, equipped force with the capability and capacity to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. That's what we should all inspire. The moment we stop inspiring that, we're going to have a problem. That would be my mic drop. I'm not actually going to drop the mic, don't worry about that. But I'd pick up the mic again to say that the all-volunteer force question implies that conscription is a viable option, and I don't really think it is. Unless the political will of the people supports it. Now I want you to think back to World War II and to Vietnam as the example. World War II, we had a draft going on. People wouldn't dodge that draft, right? We had the political will to fight in World War II. Vietnam, did we have the political will to fight that war properly? No, we did not. And for you Vietnam veterans, you have my apologies for that, even though I had nothing to do with the decision-making at the time. But frankly, you guys got the shaft from the politicians out there. So that's an issue. You've got to have the political will to make it work. At its core, military accessions is really just a supply and demand business for people. That's the way it works. So let's talk about the demand side. Let me take you for a jog around the planet for a moment. Let's talk about China. President Xi says what? Publicly stated that China has to be ready to take Taiwan no later than 2027, right? China's the bully of the Pacific. What are they doing to the Philippines right now? The Philippines puts a fishing ship out there in their exclusive economic zone, and the Chinese show up with their Coast Guard and their ships, and they water cannon those guys. They're the bullies of the Pacific. Vietnam, the Philippines, Australia. If you're one of those Pacific nations, Japan, China is not treating you well. Predatory lending practices wherever they expand. And by the way, they have the world's largest navy. We do not. Russia has been at war with Ukraine now for 2.5 years. They annexed Crimea about 10 years ago. Most people don't remember that that happened in 2014. Iteratively, they've been seizing more and more of Ukraine's land on their way to a resurgent Soviet Union. And now, Vladimir Putin has reminded the world that any missile strikes against Russia's borders could trigger a nuclear response by Russia. And he's going to tie that together and say that any attack, even by Ukraine, supported by another country would be considered a joint or combined attack. In other words, he wants to try to threaten the U.S. and say, you could be responsible for that too. Oh yeah, and there's this little nuclear-capable country called North Korea with this little weird guy who's in charge of it. That's a problem. How about the Middle East? Israel's at war with just about everybody over there right now, right? But who's behind that? The country of Iran, absolutely. So that's a powder keg as well. And let's not forget terrorism. We've had a border that's been open to illegal crossings for the last 4 years. CBP right now reports that 370 terrorist watch list suspects were apprehended at the border. How many got through? We don't know. So back in the day, in 2008, when the National Defense Strategy came out, we called this the 4+1. The threats were China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and violent extremism or terrorism. In 2016, the Pentagon modified the National Defense Strategy and said, hey, we really care about two of these threats, Russia and China, not necessarily in that order. And then the other three we're going to group as sort of also-rans, and that'll be Iran, North Korea, and terrorism. How does that math add up, folks? How did that work out? Looks like all five of them are a threat right now, right? Both of those add up to 5. Does it really matter which ones are the major ones and which ones are the minor ones? So that's the demand side of the problem. Do we need the military? You bet we do. That is the demand side of our supply and demand problem. On the supply side, General Campbell mentioned that 23% of 17 to 24-year-olds in the U.S. population are morally, mentally, and physically capable of serving. 23%. It was about 29% when I was Deputy Commander of Navy Recruiting. So what does morally, mentally, and physically mean? Morally means not a convicted felon. By the way, you young folks in uniform, thanks for not being felons. Nice job. Mentally, just had a discussion with Trevor about this a few moments ago, but mentally it means that you haven't been on Ritalin for the last year, and if you were ADHD diagnosed, then a doctor can come back to you and say, okay, you no longer have ADHD, and you no longer need Ritalin. Also, it means you got to be able to get a 31 or better on the ASVAB. At least those were the old rules. And physically means that you have to be able, as a 24-year-old male, just as an example, you have to be able to run a 1.5 miles in less than 13 minutes and 15 seconds, so 13:15, 1.5 miles, 42 push-ups, and a plank if you're in the United States Navy, because we gave up sit-ups for some reason. You have to be able to plank for 1 minute and 20 seconds. So that's how physically, that's just a pass, okay? Those aren't high standards, that's just a pass. So that's morally, mentally, physically. Oh, by the way, you have to be less than 26% body fat. In late 2019, the world dealt with this pandemic thing called COVID, right? The novel coronavirus. In 2020 and 2021, what did the job market do? They laid everybody off and unemployment went up. Usually when unemployment goes up, recruiting goes up, right? Because everybody needs a job and a bunch of people are going to flock to the military. That did not happen. Now, all the services met their goals and got their numbers, but they didn't follow that trend. And then the trend continued in 2022 and 2023, where nobody wanted to show up to the military. What happened in August of 2021? The botched exit from Afghanistan and Abbey Gate, right? Does that erode trust in our public institutions? Sure it does. So, in 2022 and 2023, the Army and the Navy missed their numbers. They couldn't recruit. Now that's significant. The job market recovered, the recruiting market did not. I think I need to note that the Army and the Navy did make goal in 2024. One of the things that General Campbell, and I'm going to seem parochial when I say this, but one of the things that General Campbell didn't mention was, yeah, the Army reduced their goal to make their numbers. The Navy increased their goal. So the Navy increased their goal and made their numbers in 2024. By the way, the folks at Navy Recruiting are super proud of that, by the way. And that's good. So supply and demand, if we just look at that, that leaves a pretty bleak context. Have I depressed just about everybody in the room? Everybody pretty depressed right now? Is there hope? Yeah, I think there is hope. We see it in the form of the young folks that are sitting in this room willing to wear a uniform right now. I think we have the opportunity for good leadership on the horizon at the executive levels. But both the Army and the Navy are innovating and adjusting to the market. General Campbell mentioned that 9% of the population between the ages of 17 and 24 are propensed, want to join. I used to tell my recruiters, I don't care if they're propensed or not. If I needed them to be propensed, why would I hire you guys? You guys are the salesmen. You go propense them. Make it happen. That's the way that needs to work. In response to China's plans for 2027, Admiral Franchitti, the Chief of Naval Operations, has pledged to have a fully manned, equipped, and correctly trained naval force, both on the active duty and on the reserve side. But with the supply side of the equation looking like it does, and again, borrowing from the Army, which is really where we sometimes do our best work, isn't it, when we copy somebody else's good ideas? The Navy came up with this Future Sailor Prep Course. General Campbell mentioned it. I'm going to dive a little deeper into it. Here's what it looks like. It's 3 weeks. You get a recruit. You send them to boot camp up at Great Lakes 3 weeks early. For 3 weeks, what do they emphasize? Applied math. They emphasize reading and reading comprehension and writing. Some of the basics. Oh, by the way, if you're out of shape, if you're greater than 26% body fat, or you can't run a mile and a half in less than 13 minutes and 15 seconds, they're going to put you on a diet and get you to exercise. And they're going to work you up until you can complete the standards, until you meet the standards that the Navy requires. So calling it a lowering of standards, not really accurate. What's happening is FSPC is a finishing school to do what society, parents, institutions, schools have failed to do. We're bringing the sailors up to standards. The Navy's tremendously proud about this. I'm going to share with you a couple of stories that I've heard from the folks on the supply side of the Navy. One recruit, after graduating FSPC academic, told a visiting senior officer, "Sir, I always thought I was stupid. That's what everybody told me when I was a kid. I just believed it. The Navy has now proven to me that I'm smart." Another kid, recruit, entered with an ASVAB score that qualified him for ratings like BM and AO, bosun's mate and aviation ordnanceman. For those of you that aren't Navy, the bosun's mates are the folks that are pulling lines and tying knots and doing a lot of the basic ship handling stuff. And the aviation ordnancemen are the ones who are lifting bombs onto the airplanes. And I'm not casting aspersions to those rates, but I am saying that those rates do not require a high ASVAB score, okay? This young man went to FSPC, pushed his ASVAB score up, and by the way, at the end of FSPC, you retake the ASVAB, you retake the physical fitness assessment, and that becomes your baseline. That's your starting point, your new starting point. At the end of FSPC, his ASVAB score increased so much that he qualified for information technology. In other words, he gets to be a computer guy, right? He called his mom and dad, both retired aviation ordnancemen, and said, "Mom, Dad, you're never going to believe how high my ASVAB score is, but I still want to be an AO to make you guys proud." And they were like, "No! Do not do that. That's a dumb idea. Why would you do that?" So now he's going through ITA school. He became an information technologist. Finally, we had one FSPC class recently where 6 of the graduates from FSPC were honor graduates after boot camp. Started in FSPC with ASVAB scores as low as 10 and moved themselves up to honor grad at the end of boot camp. So again, this has become a finishing school, and it's become a school that will raise the sailor up to the standards we need them to be at to serve. If that's not formulating some questions in your head about where we are in society, it should be. Okay. We can discuss whether this is a good program or not. Maybe it costs too much. Maybe it's unfair to those who don't get an FSPC head start. All of that is debatable. But I got to give credit to the Army and the Navy as institutions. They have created these schools, and it seems to be working. I'm going to switch the subject a little bit. I'm going to say this. The DoD stinks at marketing. Young kids in the room, the folks wearing the uniforms. How many of you watch cable TV on a regular basis? That's what I thought. Okay, older folks in the room, those of you not wearing uniforms, how many of you watch cable TV on a regular basis? Okay. This is my point, ladies and gentlemen. If you see a military ad on cable TV, that's a waste of money. Okay, because it's not reaching the target audience. They're watching TV, they're watching streaming services, they're playing video games. The ad in the video game catches their attention. The ad during the college football game, unless they happen to be sitting in the room with mom and dad watching this game, that's not doing squat for us. You're not getting a return on that investment. And by the way, the only service that doesn't stink at marketing, United States Marine Corps. They've held to their standards, and they do a great job of it. All right. Let's talk about the draft just for a moment. I'm just going to raise some questions about the draft. Do we have a selective service? Selective service system. It's still there, right? So between the ages of 18 and 25, all males have to join. Ladies, why do you not have to register? Is it really fair that just men have to register for the selective service? Isn't that weird? I think it's weird. Are we really having an honest conversation about that? How does this work if the draft gets enacted? First of all, the president says, let's activate the draft. And then it rolls downhill through the Pentagon chain, and the selective service starts holding lotteries. And who do they call? All the dudes. 100% of them, right? And when they call all the men, then what do? We send them through a processing center, and we send 77% of them home. Remember that number, 23%? Well, 23% is probably what you're going to get because they're morally, mentally, and physically capable. Now, we might be able to raise that up if you can get them to go to FSPC, but can you really get a guy that you drafted unwillingly to go to FSPC and study to be smarter? Or is he just going to say, forget you, I'm never going to meet your standard, and walk out the door? Something to think about, folks. Just something to think about. Okay. Back in my day, we called that the sick, lame, and lazy. They always show up on deployment. It's amazing how many high school football knee injuries happen just before you take an aircraft carrier to sea. And the guy says, man, I can't climb a ladder. Well, I just saw you climb up the side of that airplane. Really? No, I can't climb a ladder. I can't go to sea. Really? And the doctor always goes, yeah, you're right. He can't climb up a ladder. That's the sick, lame, and lazy. It happens every time. Happens every time. All right. How successful will a draft actually be if we did that? Okay. Folks, the special operators out there say that culture eats strategy for breakfast every morning. They're right. The real battle is within our society. Our leaders should be inspiring trust in government and in governmental institutions. Too many times in career military and in government civil service, careerism wins out over honesty at all levels. The mishandling of the COVID crisis, the political corruption in agencies like the CDC and the Department of Education, the botched exit from Afghanistan in 2021, the surfeit of wounded warrior commercials on television. By the way, that does affect Navy recruiting or any recruiting. You know that most, I want to say it's close to 80% of recruits say, I don't want to join the military because I don't want to be one of those guys. They see it on TV, they think it's going to happen to them. They put themselves right in that picture. And let's face it, there's some rampant narcissism going on out here created by social media that has eroded the American culture. Strategies always lag culture. And yet somehow Uncle Woody here remains hopeful. My opinion on the way forward for the all-volunteer force, you got to stay status quo, got to keep innovating to reach the market, got to keep bringing those standards up to a level where we can get the right folks in the front door and get them trained up to serve. So abandoning the all-volunteer force or instituting conscription to fill the gaps creates more problems than it solves. And if our population can no longer produce citizens who are willing to fight for this country, then the population doesn't deserve the freedom that their military provides. Okay, well, I hope I'm not just getting amen from the crowd here. I really want you to think about this and challenge me and Colonel Riley when it comes to the questions and answers. So thanks for your agreement. I know this is a friendly audience, so that helps. And I look forward to your questions. Colonel, you're up.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here with you this evening. I did come up from College Station today, so I will start with a traditional howdy. Howdy. There we go. Good. Glad to see some things endure, no doubt about it. Thank you for that, Admiral Bill Woody. That was fantastic. And I think that you will see some agreement, and then you'll see some areas where there's not agreement, which is a good thing. Because tonight what we're here to do is not to celebrate groupthink, but is to come together and have a discussion about a very challenging topic, and one that desperately and direly does impact our country as we go into the future. As we look at the current state of our force, right, conscription ended on 30 June 1973, and for over 50 years we've had an all-volunteer force. And that all-volunteer force has served us well. Absolutely has. It's endured, and it's been tried and tested through primarily desert wars, both Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and then our later wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm going to start today also with a thesis. I guess we're college graduates, so we'll do that. Mine's the exact ends, ways, and means. Mine's a little bit different. I'm taking a look at this from a number of perspectives that I'm going to talk about with you this evening. But my overall thesis is this. Barring an existential threat to the homeland, there is no political or popular will to abandon the all-volunteer force for a conscription model. I don't see one at all. And I'm going to provide a little bit of strategic context to begin to back up what I'm talking about. First off, that we don't have an existential conventional threat to the homeland right now. We live in what political scientists would call free security. We can talk about that later if you like. Number two, there is no popular support, none at all, for more ill-defined and ever-shifting forever wars that we fail to decisively win. And that's a good thing. That should serve as a check on further political and military adventurism that frankly is wasteful in both blood and treasure in this nation. And having served multiple tours in Afghanistan, I can speak to that from my own personal experiences. Number three, there is a high level of popular mistrust of government institutions or political establishments right now. Even the military, which is traditionally viewed as the highest trusted institution in our country, with the media and Congress being the lowest. No offense, of course. Well, maybe. But even the Reagan Institute, their poll in 2018 says 70% of Americans had a great deal of trust or confidence in the military. Right now, it's down to 46%. That's a precipitous drop in just a few years. There's this view that we should be able to adopt other countries' conscription models as they might apply here. As I've looked into that rather deeply, I don't see any conscription model from any other country that works in the United States. Our strategic culture is too different. Our geography, demography, history, and threats are wildly different. I don't see an adequate match. Strategically, I look at us right now as we're in an interwar period. This is our 1938 moment. That's where we are right now. This is a time where we need to be experimenting, we need to be thinking, we need to be preparing for the next war that is to come. And then we need to start to prepare to change our force to be prepared for that threat. And that's an overall context that I look at this through. So there's three factors that I see that impact the all-volunteer force. And I'll discuss those briefly. First is social, second is foundational, third is organizational. So let's start with social. Let's talk about the 800-pound woke elephant in the room, right? Is there a wokeification of the military? My personal opinion on this is wokeness nowadays is a lot like pornography used to be. Nobody can define it, but they know it when they see it, right? And so I'm not going to use that term. What I'm going to talk about, though, is what kind of policies are we seeing within the Department of Defense specifically that might be having impacts. Because I joined the Marine Corps during the Clinton administration, and there was all kinds of discussions at that time about social engineering of the military. So this is not a new thing. But right now, there is a definite focus and priority in two areas. One is DEI, and ensuring that DEI policies weave their way throughout the federal government and specifically in the military. And secondly, a quixotic crusade to weed out this mythical extremism that seems to be ever elusive to actual real investigation. Those two things are happening right now, and I think they are having a detrimental effect, both recruiting and retention. Secondly, the civil-military divide in this country is the largest that it's ever been. You have less than 1% of Americans serving in uniform. Most people don't even know anybody in the military or have any military connections. And in many ways, when you look at the statistics where recruiting comes from, the military's become a family business, right? The service members come from families of service members. But that is having an end right now. There are more and more military families that are encouraging their children to not join the military for reasons that I'll talk about in a couple minutes. As was already mentioned, the majority of 17 to 24-year-olds are ineligible for military service. I won't tread over that ground already, but I will provide a recommendation for that near the end, and one that I haven't heard floated yet, and so maybe it's worth talking about. There's been a lot of talk about this generation, Gen Z and then Gen A that's following them, and I have in open, full transparency, my oldest son, he's a senior at Texas A&M. He'll commission in the Marine Corps in May. My younger son's, thank you. And so he's one of these Gen Z kids. My younger son's a freshman at A&M, and he's pursuing a contract in the Marine Corps. But this generation has the lowest level of recorded patriotism and little appetite for military service. However, they do crave purpose. They really do. I work with these young students every day. They crave real purpose. And sometimes they just don't know what they don't know. There is potential there. I learned long ago not to write off the millennials because they stepped up when their number was called, and I don't write off Gen Z and Gen A. One thing that we have to really take a look at is the negative impacts from the COVID-19 lockdowns and vaccine mandates. I was a base commander in Japan when COVID hit and saw firsthand how the reactions, then overreactions within the institution took place. And I was the professor of naval science at Texas A&M, still on active duty when the vaccine mandates came down, and saw firsthand just how devastating that was for many people on active duty and those seeking contracts at the time. I don't think we can discount the lingering impacts of those mandates and what they're doing for both recruiting and retention. And lastly, on the social factors, I think we need to be very clear about something here. We lost the last two wars. You never hear that. Nobody says it. We lost the last two wars. And our incredibly disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021 really highlighted that for all of the world to see. We like winners. We're Americans. We didn't win. And so there's a syndrome I call the Uncle Bob syndrome. Everybody knows Uncle Bob, right? Everybody has one. Uncle Bob is that veteran who, you might go see every once in a while and you're like, hey, Uncle Bob, I'm interested in joining the whatever service. And Uncle Bob joined after 9/11 because he was a patriot, went and served, maybe did multiple tours of duty overseas in combat, got out, and is struggling right now, and struggling hard. And there's a lot of Uncle Bobs. I'm on the board of directors of a nonprofit that we deal with these guys every day. What's Uncle Bob telling little Sue, little Johnny? Don't you join the military. Go be a doctor or a lawyer, something like that. Don't do what I did. Right? Those 6 social factors right now are having a distinct impact and a very detrimental impact on both recruiting and retention. Foundational, the second set of factors. Right now, we need to take a good, long, hard look at our Title X roles and missions. I said, well, what the heck's he talking about? What should our Title X roles and missions for the services be in the 21st century? They haven't been really reviewed or thought through. Are the traditional domain-based divisions of responsibilities between services even applicable today? I don't think so. What should the roles and missions of the services be before we start talking about how many people we need in them? At the strategic international level, you're seeing the extreme decay of the rules-based international order that the United States put into play after 1947 and after World War II. And you're seeing through successive administrations no desire or capacity to continue that rules-based international order. We talk about it all the time, but I'll just give you a couple of examples. One of the key factors that facilitated the rules-based international order was freedom of navigation in the seas. The ability for globalization to take place, and to do that, you had to be able to move goods and services across the seas, right? And the guarantor of that since the end of World War II has been the United States Navy, right? They guaranteed freedom of navigation worldwide. Nowadays, they have neither the capacity nor the desire to do it. Woody talked about what's happening in the South China Sea with what the PRC is doing with the Filipinos. We let them do that. We don't stop them for a variety of reasons. But I remember when I was working on the U.S. Pacific Command staff, I was in the J-35 working with Admiral Harris there at the time, and it would drive him crazy because there was neither the will nor the capacity to really challenge and confront the PRC with what they were doing. You say, well, that's China. We don't want to go to war with them. That's fine. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about the Red Sea. There's an operation put in place to establish freedom of navigation in the Red Sea against a non-quasi-state militant group called the Houthis, who have effectively achieved sea control and sea denial against the United States Navy without a Navy. That's a foundational problem. Thirdly, we have the overall decline of neoliberalism and the associated globalization and the push for onshoring and nearshoring that you're seeing right now as part of an overall isolationist trend that has been happening over the past subsequent administrations and shows no chance of stopping right now. Add to this the changing conduct and character of warfare. We're not talking about glacial, slow-moving counterinsurgency operations anymore. What we're really talking about is great power competition and high-end, high-intensity warfare against peer competitors. We are not prepared as a country for the losses that would be endured in that type of conflict right now. And lastly, under foundational, is the utter failure of Congress to provide certainty in the budget process through endless continuing resolutions. The hurt and the damage that has done to the DoD is almost incalculable. Overall, what I'm describing is we have no grand strategy. The last time we did was when we faced off against the Soviet Union in the Cold War. Organizationally, and then I'll wrap that up with a couple of recommendations, because I know we want to get to some Q&A. Organizationally, I have 3 points here. First really is the real failure of both civilian and military leaders to follow through on their promises of the last 2 wars, to define victory in the current proxy wars. I can't tell you what victory looks like in the Ukraine or in Israel right now. Perhaps they can, but they haven't. And to provide clarity on how to counter and defeat future threats. The services need to define the case for military service in a way that they are not doing right now. And this gets to what Woody was talking about here, is making the case for service that goes beyond marketing. Secondly, we have a broken procurement system and industrial base. We specialize in high-end, incredibly expensive, boutique multitaskers. I'm looking specifically at the Air Force and the Navy here, that are always delayed and over budget. We need to fundamentally flip that around. And we do that by transforming from an industrial-based warfare model to an information-based warfare model. What does that look like? That's my first recommendation. First, our active and reserve forces specifically have got to accelerate transition to an information-based model. What does that look like? I'll give you an example. Right now, an M1A2 main battle tank takes 4 people to run it. A driver, a commander, a loader, and a gunner. So right now, what we're doing is we're manning the equipment. What if we had 4 people that could manage 12 tanks? How about we equip the man? And instead of buying these super high-end, incredibly expensive type of weapon systems, what if we build more disposable, lower-end weapon systems that can be controlled semi-autonomously or autonomously, with a smaller group of people that are highly motivated, highly educated, highly trained, that exercise initiative, that are a volunteer force, that is able to then utilize not tomorrow's technology, today's technology, and not a legacy way that we fight the last war, but a way that prepares to actually fight the next war. So I'm not here to talk about how we're going to get more people in the military. I think we have probably too many people in the military, frankly, right now. We need to restructure what they do and have a real discussion on how we equip the man, not man the equipment. Second recommendation, this gets to the medical issue here with the 23% that are eligible. We've got to review and revise DoD Instruction 6130.03. That's the medical standards for military service, appointment, enlisted, or induction. I'm sure that Woody knows about that one. DoD makes changes to this all the time, most recently to allow transgender service members to join. Why don't we take a good hard look at the medical standards that we need for our services and determine what type of medical requirements need to be made for deploying service members and what roles or services, don't want to call out any right now, that may not need to deploy, that may not need to have the same type of medical standards. Why does it need to be a one-size-fits-all? Why does somebody who serves in the Space Force in Colorado need to have the same medical qualifications as a Marine who's training to work in distributed operations in an island in the South China Sea? Probably don't. Especially if we're going to look at bringing on a cyber force, which in my opinion has much greater utility than a Space Force. Why do they need to have the same medical standards as an infantryman? And then lastly, we do need to have a discussion about public service. I think we need to expand the Army and Air National Guard structure and the Coast Guard structure for greater homeland security, homeland defense, emergency management roles, and as an avenue for expanded public service in every state, not just in states that have big military installations. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your patience, for listening to me talk on, and I look very much forward to your questions here this evening.
Well, I'll tell you what, we record all these and we edit them and we put them on our website. And I've actually in 3 years looked at a couple of them, but I'm going to go back and look at this one because there was a lot of good information and insight tonight that we ought to take home. Hey, Chuck, can you put up slide 24? I want to use a slide that we built as a backup just to comment on one of the remarks that Mike made. We took a look at some other models for military service, and we're going to get there. But Mike mentioned the question of whether or not we could ever go back to conscription, and I agree with him that for us that would be such a heavy lift and such a politically sensitive thing. I don't see how we would do it. Now, this is interesting because these are some summaries of other countries' models for service. Notice that in the top line there that the countries we fought in World War II don't have any volunteer service. We have the same service model as China, which the guys who do this for a living call it de jure, which means, and theoretically, we have a selective service system. But we don't use it. We could if I guess we wanted to. The bottom two are the mandatory service countries. Notice a lot of those are in a bad part of the world now, over close to Russia. A lot of those have gone back to conscription in the last 5 or 6 years because they've seen which way the wind is blowing in that part of the world. The difference, though, is that many of those countries only stopped conscription in the early 2000s. So the senior military and civilian leaders grew up under that system and know how it works and are comfortable with it, so that makes it a lot easier to go back. So I think a big difference is that if anybody says we can go back to conscription, remember we haven't done it for 50 years. So nobody knows what it's all about. So I've got my phone ready for questions. If you have cards, please get those up. Let me open with a couple here. Woody, you mentioned or maybe one of you mentioned the endless wars thing, which I think is something that we absolutely see as a very difficult time of our career. There's an argument, though, that a professionalized military that's been produced by the All-Volunteer Force makes it easier to get in to endless wars, because that small force is less likely to question than the order to go there. Whereas a conscripted force, or a force that was more broadly representative of the country, would be more likely to push back against the prospect of another war. Do you have any reaction to that argument? Either one of you?
I'll start that one if you don't mind. That was my comment there, and then you clean up whatever I mess up there. So if I understand the question is that, would it be easier to have those types of forever wars with a all-volunteer force vice a conscription force? I don't think so. I don't think it's necessarily. I think when I take a look at it, when you have a large force, whether that force is all-volunteer or conscription, there's a desire to use that force. And so one of the things that I think is important is, as we take a look at what types of roles and missions we want the services to do in the future, is to really scale down excess, for lack of a better term, and to focus on real vital U.S. national interests and not everything else. And so I don't necessarily think that makes it easier. Now, on the flip side, I don't want any force pushing back, per se, against the civilian control, i.e., the chief executive says, this is what you're going to do, you do it. I don't want any of them necessarily pushing back, but I think from a popular support perspective, I don't necessarily think that the analogy that you proposed is really follows. Yeah, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I would also press back a little bit on the premise behind the question. The premise behind the question is a smaller force supported by conscription would keep you out of major wars. I think did I catch that right? Is that the premise?
That's that argument that has been proposed, is that a smaller professionalized force makes it easier to get into small wars.
Yeah, I would also add to that, though, that the saying goes that you go to war with the military you have. And so, especially in the Pacific, where if a war were to kick off there, it's going to kick off quickly. If you don't have a ready force and a large force that's properly manned, trained, equipped, you're not going to win that battle. You're not going to win it at the very beginning. The days of being able to ramp up an industrial base and produce weapon systems that are relatively simple and easy to produce and can be produced quickly. I don't remember the numbers, but look at the P-51 fighter, for example, in World War II. From concept to fielding of that aircraft was something like 90 days. I mean, and it took us 25 years to get an F-35 from concept to field, and it's still not quite there yet. So I'll leave it there. I think you have to consider all sides of the equation.
Can I jump into a little bit to just dovetail on what he's talking about? Let's say the fight in the South China Sea kicks off. All right, he's 100% right. We don't have the ability to just mobilize, deploy, marshal our forces, and then attack at a time of our choosing. Now, you got to fight to get to the fight and fight in the fight. Right? I mean, that's how it is. And we fundamentally haven't had to do that since World War II. My perspective on what he's talking about, though, is I don't want a large force out there necessarily of people in capital ships that are going to get sunk, because they're going to get sunk. I would much rather have a smaller, lethal, distributed force that's able to attack across domains in order to achieve the effects that we're trying to do and limit the exposure of our personnel to that actual fighting, because they're already in place and they have the distributed systems in place. We're not there yet. We need to, like you said, you're going to fight with the military you have, 100%. We need to get to that, in my opinion, quickly.
I don't want to turn this into a debate about how we're going to fight the war in the South China Sea, but yeah, I'd rather stick with the all-volunteer force thing, and I'm certainly not going to argue with a former J-35
Well,
about it.
CSIS has done some pretty interesting simulations of the war in the Pacific, and they're really, really ugly. In fact, the percentage of the force we lose is about what we lost percentage of the force in World War II.
Yeah, so, I've seen that study.
Yes, sir.
The vets coming back and not recommending that path to their family. I'm a vet. I've got 2 kids here that are reflecting on it, and I'm having troubles recommending the path because of that concern. I want them to be able to provide for their family, and I don't see how it works out unless it's getting airtime to become a pilot or something like that. Where it's a clear path.
Oh yeah, it's a golden life.
But could you speak to that more? How can that be improved, the situation, or can you offer clarity on whether it's not as bad as I think it is?
Yeah, so the Joint Advanced Marketing Research Survey, or JAMRS, and somebody really got a good fitness report bullet out of that one. They spent time coming up with that name. They come out and talk about influencers and how influencers like yourself affect the decisions of young people who are willing to serve or who are questioning whether to serve or not. It used to be that we could depend, at least in the Navy, that about 16% of our folks that came to our front doors were in the family business world. This was, mom and or dad were a retired military, and they would recommend service. And the kids, by the way, were not nervous about it. Why? Because they saw what a great life their parents led, and they enjoyed it, and they were proud of their service, and so it became a family business. That number has been cut in half over the last, about 8 years. It's down to about 8% now. It may even be less than that. The latest JAMRS survey is a little overdue for coming out. I don't have a good answer for your question, except for the fact that in my 35 years, I think I served for 9 different presidents, and what are the odds that I agreed with all 9 of them all the time? My job was to follow orders, execute policy, and support that policy later on as a flag officer. All I can tell you is that it's a moral decision on your part as a parent. I would recommend for both of my daughters that they serve. Neither one were even remotely interested in it, but that's okay. They've sought out a good life doing other things, and frankly, if they're not on my payroll, then they're good. But I'll say this: I think it's a tough decision to make right now if there's distrust in the institution, and I think that's where you're at. And I'm going to pass it over, toss it to Mike, and see if he's got anything.
Thank you very much. That's right. I think that's a great question. And as a parent of a son who went through Marine Corps OCS last summer and will commission in May and go off and start his adventure and his journey, this is something that my wife and I have talked a lot about. And I never pushed him to join at all, just so you all know. Never did. This was something he came to on his own, actually with a little bit of me making sure that this wasn't him trying to be like Dad, him wanting to do his own thing. What I would say is I still believe fervently in the military. I 100% do. I believe in our military. That said, I think there are some significant cultural issues with some of the services. And so if you want to talk separately about that, we can talk separately about that. But I think that the military as a whole is still an honorable line of work. It is still a very important and purposeful line of work. And it is something that it inspires a level of selfless service that we need more of in this country.
I want to put something out before we ask the next question. I want to put something out because every now and then we start to bash the millennials or Gen Z or even Gen A. And I share Colonel Riley's view that we maybe shouldn't do that. And just to be clear, Gen Zers right now, those are the folks between the ages of 12 and 27. It's a pretty wide swath of folks. So we still have Gen Zers that can't even qualify for military service yet. Millennials are, age 28 to 43. So at this time, in my world, they're commanding squadrons, some of them are. But I want to point out that both millennials and Gen Z just took USS Eisenhower. I'm going to take a little issue with one of your comments that we're losing the war against the Houthis. I think we're beating them up pretty good out there. But they tried to throw out attacks on the Eisenhower over a continuous period of 7 months. And Gen Zers and millennials were completely in charge of that battle, and that ship was not hit. They're 100% in that game. So I think we have to remember to thank those folks for the good job that they are doing.
John.
One thing, I agree that the sailors on those ships have done a phenomenal job defending their ships. What were they sent to do? Sent to establish freedom of navigation in the Red Sea, to reestablish maritime shipping in the Red Sea. That has not happened. They have defended their ships admirably, absolutely right. But the strategic effect has not happened yet. Maritime shipping still going around Africa.
We'll talk about that offline.
John, go ahead.
If an 18-year-old enlists in the Army, how much money do they make a year? I know they get free room and board, but how much money do they make a year?
I'm sorry, we were up here bantering. I apologize. You're going to have to ask that again.
Yes, here we go.
If an 18-year-old high school graduate enlists in the Army, not into ROTC or anything, just enlists in the Army, how much money do they make a year? I know they get free room and board.
It's $24,000 a year right now for an E3.
Well, John, that's...
Yeah, anybody got a phone with Google on it?
Yeah, that's...
All right, 24. Okay, 24,000 a year.
How can we win battles and wars on all fronts simultaneously against China, North Korea, Russia, and Iran, with each of these countries having a decidedly larger military than the U.S.?
Well, number one, great question. Thanks for asking it. There's no way that the United States by itself can win wars like that. We have to be able to depend on allies and partners to help us fight those battles. What you just described would be known as World War III.
And then we would have a draft.
Yes,
Yeah.
and then we would have a draft. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so since the founding of this country, we've declared war 7 times. And I can list them if you wish. The question is, in my lifetime, 1945 to today, we have fought in Korea, undeclared war. We fought in Vietnam, undeclared war. We had Desert Shield, Desert Storm, undeclared war. We had Afghanistan, undeclared war. And I'm only listing a few of them. We have troops taking fire throughout the world. In the Constitution of the United States, it says that the President must ask the Congress for a declaration of war, which is a element of national, or an indicator of national will to fight a war. What do you think the impact of requiring that? Because right now we're committing troops under the War Powers Act, and it's getting us involved in wars we shouldn't be in.
Yeah, it's a great question, Mark. So many years ago, when I was a student at the National War College, I asked the very same question to Justice Antonin Scalia. We got a private audience with him, and you know what he did? Olay! He treated that like a matador with a bull in the ring. Here's the problem. As you know, Congress has the power of the purse. Congress has the power to declare war. The President is the Commander-in-Chief, and the War Powers Act gives him some limits as to how he can deploy or put forces out there in wartime. And to this point, I personally am comfortable with the tension that those 3 things provide. I know it's not a perfect system, but if you tie the President down, can he act quickly enough as the Commander-in-Chief to go after a terrorist like Afghanistan, like the Taliban in Afghanistan?
Wind up being there for 20 years.
Well, the problem with that is strategy. And that's what I would say. There's no end game. So if you properly define your strategy, ends, ways, means, and the ends include an exit, then we fix that problem. The problem we have with that, and the problem we had with Afghanistan and the latest thing in Iraq, was that we never defined an exit strategy. It's a strategic and a policy issue less than it is a law issue. Woody's personal opinion.
Yeah, it's a good question, Mark. I would say Congress does, though, and it's called the Authorization for the Use of Military Force. It's an AUMF. That provides a legal, statutory framework for the president as a commander-in-chief to then employ military forces beyond the timeline of the War Powers Act, because the War Powers Act provides only a very specific timeline, as I'm sure you know. Now, you can argue that by relying on authorizations for the use of military force, we're exhibiting a lack of political moral courage. You can make that argument. The flip side of that, though, is saying that by doing an authorization for the use of military force that's passed through Congress, signed by the president, that is indicating popular support, because we're in a representative democracy, popular support for that campaign or for that military operation that is about to be undertaken or is currently undertaken. So I'd say, yes, we have not had a declaration of war since World War II, but the AUMF is the current tool that we use to indicate that popular support, whether that's well known or not.
A question in the back of the room, and then Keith will come to you.
Yes, thank you for both your presentations. For this, for you, Colonel Riley, I'm Lieutenant Chuck Holter with Civil Air Patrol. I have 9 of my cadets here from the Dallas Composite Squadron. And my question to you is, with your recommendations and the things that, actually it's a two-part question, the real recommendations and things that you've put on the table, when would you foresee those changes being made? When Gen Z and Gen A become the actual leaders, where us Gen X and folks older have aged our way out? When would you see if any of that possibility would even occur? And number two, and my second part of the question, do you have any published writings or with your thesis of that anywhere for any type of further reading on that?
Yeah, thank you very much for your questions. To answer your second question first, no, I haven't published that yet. But that is something that is, being thought through. The question on when, that's a good one. It's ongoing right now, quite frankly. This transition, it's being forced upon the DOD based upon us being in the interwar period and looking towards really how to fight the pacing threat, which is what the PRC is called, right? How are we going to fight them? So this transition from an industrial-based model to an information-based model is ongoing right now within the DOD. I would say, if I had to rank the services, I'd say the Marine Corps is the furthest along with their expeditionary events base operation concept, and then the real procurement types of changes that's been going on throughout the Marine Corps, and a lot of that's been well publicized, and there's been an intramural firefight within the Marine Corps with a lot of retired leaders about whether that's the right way to go, but we're going that direction and probably going the fastest, and as the smallest, in many ways the most nimble of the forces, we can do that. The other forces are struggling with how do they change much larger and much more industrial types of forces, right? Think of the Army with tank divisions, right? How do you transition that into something more nimble, more able to fight in the next war? The M10 tank, light tank that's just coming out and being fielded by the Army is one step in that direction, but it still holds 4 people. Why is it holding 4 people, right? And so each of the services is struggling with this right now, and then the second part I put on that I turn over to Woody is, how then do we incorporate semi-autonomous types of command and control with this model? That type of experimentation is happening right now. Actually, some of that's going on down at the Rellis campus in Bryan, Texas, but we're not anywhere near a fielded force with that. We need to accelerate that is really my point.
And I like your question as well. This was really based on an information-based force that Colonel Riley proposed, and frankly, it's an interesting idea, and I like it. Here's the problem with it, though, and I won't get in a huge debate with you, but I will challenge you slightly in that. And by the way, Civil Air Patrol, I used to be a Civil Air Patrol cadet. Love that. Love you guys. I still have the uniform at home. It does not fit. The problem with information-based forces is that they are going to be software-driven. And until we find software that writes itself, I used to work in the test community years ago, and I did operational flight program testing on tactical aircraft, the A-6 Intruder, the F-18 Hornet. I was concurrently qualified and flew both of them, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, digital versus analog, pretty hard to mix them up. Bottom line is, it was tremendously expensive to develop even the simple software that went into the A-6 Intruder. Until we can figure out a way to get AI to develop that software for us, and until we have a power grid that will support that kind of computing power, and until that technology advances, we're going to be stuck with a lot of expense when it comes to developing autonomous and semi-autonomous weapons. That's just a fact of life for now. It doesn't mean we're not going there. It just means it's probably further down the horizon than any of us really understand. And that's the way I would kind of answer your question.
I don't disagree with that at all. I think you're spot on. And unfortunately, I think it's going to take some sort of event to spur that acceleration. Yeah.
Sorry to go back to the authorization to deploy troops, but let me just give you the thinking in Congress today. Glad you brought up the AUMF. After the first of the year, after January the 20th, you will see a new AUMF. So right now in Congress, you've got the Article I authority that the President uses when he sends people on his own authority under Article I in the defense of national interest. The War Powers Act is seen as a limiting factor on that Congress has put on Article I. Now, that could be a constitutional conundrum between the executive branch and the legislative branch, and I got it. Then you've got the AUMF. We have two old AUMFs that are current today, one from 1991 and one from 2012 or something. The Colonel might be able to help me with that. They do not address the modern threats. So you will see a new AUMF, at least an attempt, after the first of the year, after January 20th. And then third is the congressional right to declare war. That is true, and absent an existential threat, I don't see that happening. So the AUMF is the current, what we're operating under today, and they're at least 20 years old or 30 years old. So they are not current. Thank you.
I love it,
Nathan?
we can sit here and talk about the Ten Commandments, but it's kind of fun when the burning bush stands up and talks.
So I got a question. We are obligated to defend Taiwan. If the Chinese were to attack Taiwan, do we have the military to defend Taiwan?
Okay, no, there's no Olay here. This is going to come from I have limited experience with Taiwan, but I'm going to try this out. When I was at the National War College as a student in 2010, we had a Taiwanese student who was an exchange coming in. It was very interesting to talk to them. And back in 2010, what I heard from him was that most of the Taiwanese didn't mind that China might come across the water and take Taiwan. It didn't look that bad to them. After all, military generals from the mainland come to Taiwan to retire, and the life was pretty good, and the young folks in Taiwan were sort of going, yeah, what's the big deal? Why do we care? What was interesting about that was that then Hong Kong, which was going to be, a separate a separate government, you can do your own thing. All of a sudden, in around, 2016 or so, China cracked down on Hong Kong. And then all of a sudden Taiwan went, oh, wait a second, we don't want that. That's bad. And they were right. We are, Colonel Riley might disagree with this, but I think we are obligated to defend Taiwan. And politically, I think our leaders would say, yes, we would defend Taiwan, absolutely. What I wonder is the political will of most of this country, of most of our citizenry, not just the people in this room who are like-minded, the moment you sink an aircraft carrier in that fight and lose 2 nuclear reactors, 70 airplanes, and 5,000 sailors, will we still have the political will? I don't know the answer to that question. That's the hard part. I think we are obligated. My question is, do we have the political will to do so? So I hope that wasn't too much of an ole. I hope that answered your question. You want to shoot back, or are you okay with that?
I don't think we have the political will.
Okay. You don't. Yeah.
You mind if I jump in that for 1 second? So I want to look at it a little bit differently. I was just looking it up. I don't think we have an actual treaty alliance with Taiwan. So when you look at our actual treaty partners, mutual defense alliance partners, I don't think we have that with Taiwan. But please feel free to fact check me on that. I'm sure that y'all can do that. I'm going to look at it a little bit differently. I think that the PRC was very interested in Taiwan until Russia invaded the Ukraine. Russia was able to mass their forces along a land border that had interior lines to well-established supply depots. They were able to initiate their ground campaign at a time and place of their choosing, and 2 years later are still trying to take the Ukraine. PRC has a different problem set. They have to cover this gap, and this gap is water, of course, and it's very difficult to then try to gain and maintain a lodgment, conduct a forced entry operation, and then seize control of that terrain, especially when you are unable to muster the type of support needed from interior lines that you're not going to have. So I think that there was a real desire and thought that they could pull this off until Russia's problems in the Ukraine, seeing that, in our support that we provided to the Ukraine ever since that began and before it began. So whether or not we have the conventional military force to stop the PRC, we could have a big debate about that. But whether we have the ability to interdict and mitigate the PRC from doing a seizure of Taiwan is a different discussion. And I think the calculus inside of the PRC is really trying to figure out if they have the ability to do it right now.
Well, the other thing about the PRC as well is that there are problems within their borders. Between the issues with the Uyghurs in the West and their own demographics, they have fairly significant internal domestic issues, and make no mistake, as bleak as we can make it sound, and as much as we can pump them up to some giant, they're not quite the invincible force that I think they would like to project. What they do have, though, is a political will to act poorly in international waters and in international airspace.
You ready? You're on.
I have seen too many people in my generation believe that we cannot change the corruption in our government. And I would like you to identify some of the areas we need to address in our culture specifically, including the DEI distractions in our intelligence agencies and the way that we report our news. Also, what would you say to those people that don't believe that they have the ability to make an impact on the world, and what have you done to do that?
Nice question there. Wow. Wow, okay, there's a lot to unpack there. How about I start that, then I'll crawl under the table and okay.
I'll be there waiting.
Yeah. So well, first off, thank you. That's a heck of a good question. That really is. And there's a lot there there's a lot there to chew on. Whew. Okay. So
I'm just going to enjoy watching you sweat for a second.
Because that's happened. I'm trying to figure out where to even start with this one. So let me let me start with your generation right now. Right? We can have a discussion about corporate corruption, government corruption, those kind of things. But the reality is I'm not sure you can personally do a lot about that. And there's this feeling that you can have that I'm just one person and I'm 16 to 18 years old, I'm assuming. What can I do about this? I can't do anything because the problems are so big, and the problems are big. The reality is, from my perspective, you can only start with you. And so where is your focus? What is your perspective? What is your purpose? In the way Simon Sinek would say, what's your why? Okay? And so as for any of the young folks that are here today, and maybe the not so young folks, what's your why for being here? There's an over-fixation on self-gratification in this country, 100%, and it expresses itself in a myriad of different ways. One of the things I love about the military, and one of the reasons I served 29 years in the military, is it enabled me to not focus on me. I spent almost 30 years, 3 decades of service, focusing on other people and on learning how to serve others. And so what's the first step that you can do is learn how to first serve others in your family and in your community and in your circle. And if you and enough of your friends start to do that, you will start to affect more change than you will ever know. Because one of the things I get to see down in College Station, where I hope you're at one day, is, you like that? Is young men and women like you that really seek purpose and are seeking to try to make their country better. They just need to be pointed in the right direction, because they've given up on politicians and corporations and those kind of things, and I can't blame them, and I'm not going to encourage them to take that on. I want you to try to make your community better. And if you can serve others in your community and get enough other people to do that same thing, you'll make our society better. That's where I would go with that.
And your question, yeah. I hope you all are applauding because that was a good answer, but also because that's a fantastic question. So, and yeah, we're both up here sweating a little bit on that one. Here's what I want to drill down on a portion of it. You kind of touched on two things, and Congressman, I might ask you to get involved here, if you're willing. I don't want to put you on the spot, sir. Here's the bottom line. You touched on DEI, and you touched on sort of the fact that maybe one vote doesn't make a difference. Maybe it feels like your vote doesn't make a difference. And what's interesting is, I will tell you that, at least my experience has been, that if you contact your congressman, or if you start a petition, and that petition reaches a congressman or a representative, they will respond. Why? Because that's what they're paid to do, in a very simple way. They're your representative. I've heard stories like that quite a bit. I'm not that experienced with Congress. I did not serve as a legislative fellow or anything like that, but I've seen it work. So I would push back on that part of your question. As to the DEI piece, I think the good intentions of DEI are drowned out by the fact that it's discrimination. The D does not stand for diversity, it stands for discrimination. When you're starting to bring people in, oh, somebody's clapping, okay. But if you're trying to bring people in based on what their gender is, or what their faith is, or what the color of their skin is, instead of what are your qualifications, you might be the smartest person at that table. I would hire you because you're the smartest person at that table, not because you're a girl. You know what I mean? That's the best way to hire folks, and we need to get back to that. Why do people love sports so much? Why do we all like to watch the Cowboys? Well, maybe not today. But why do we all like to watch sports? Because it's a true meritocracy. Because everybody that plays, it doesn't matter, you know, what your race is or what your gender is. All that matters is, well, gender does matter. I got to throw that out. All that matters is, can you run the fastest? Can you jump the highest? Can you shoot the ball? That's what matters. And I would like to see our society get back to more of a meritocracy. Hear, hear. Hear. Does that help? I don't think I answered your whole question. I didn't, but I hope that helps.
Scott, let me, Scott's going to ask a question. I think I know what it's going to be, but before you do, I want to just say a quick, put a piece for what we're doing with the Air and Space Forces Association. You know, we started this effort about a year and a half ago. And what we're trying to do is mobilize the 113,000 members and 200 chapters we've got to help the recruiting issue. And we're talking about Air Force, but it applies across the services. And we've got some big things we're going to try to do, but a couple of really simple things we want to do I want to leave you with. One is we're trying to get out and help our recruiters. And it doesn't mean we're not recruiters. They are trained young men and women who know how to sell. What we want to do is help them become a part of the community, get them access to places they might not otherwise go. And a great example is access to schools, and that's an issue in the recruiting community. So if you're on a school board, or you know a school board member or principal, you might be able to help that recruiter get in the door and make a difference. The other one is really, really simple. And, you know, we've talked tonight about the fact that people just don't know about the military. So the charge to our members and to many of you is tell your story. If you had an experience in the military, and they're not all good, but tell your story so that people out there who are considering service have an accurate idea of what it's all about and why it's important. So one of the things I've noticed is that oftentimes the decision to serve is made by one event or one contact or one comment, and sometimes you might be that person. So get out and tell your story. Scott, you have a question?
Yeah, let me wrap up the questions here by simply saying this. I can't begin to tell you how many speakers I've heard in my lifetime, but I thought both of you were outstanding today. I really did. You answered the question, you didn't swing it around, and there were some tough questions, and I thought some of the questions from the audience were outstanding as well. And you, my friend, good luck to you. Thank for your service that you haven't done yet, but you're a sharp young lady. I'm very impressed with what her, and that kind of goes to where I was going with my question. When we leave here tonight, we're all going to tell our friends and family where we were, what we did. Was it good? Was it bad? Was it whatever? So my question to both of you is this. You have literally decades of information in the service, out of the service, but just what you've done literally your entire adult life. We have not had anything except some of the servicemen here in the audience. But I just wondered, with all that information that you have, in this world that we live in now, and I don't want this to sound political one way or the other, but with the world we live in today is a different world than I grew up in, and probably most of us in this room grew up in. So my question to both of you, when we leave here tonight, what is the takeaway? When you go home and you put your head on your pillow, what is it that you're most concerned about the world that we live in today? And all the information that you have about our military and our whatever, what is the thing that we need to be most concerned about? And what might we as citizens do? I think at one point you said, you know, just be focused on our community and be the very best, as I say in one of my speeches. Live your life as a go-getter, but share your life as a go-giver. And that's what we need more of. So do that in your community, make a difference in your community. But over and above that, what are the things that we should be most concerned about, that we should try and do something about as individual citizens when we leave here and walk out with all the information that you've shared here with us tonight?
I jumped on the last one first, Steve.
Yeah, I appreciate that we're having a bus throwing contest at this point. Who can throw who under the bus? That's a great question, sir. Thank you. The question was, what keeps you awake at night? The only thing that keeps me awake at night, well, no, we don't need to hear that. I'm a man of a certain age now, so I get up quite often. Let's just put it this way. I am not concerned about the youth of our America. The youth of our country, I am not concerned about them. I see so many stories of hope and of excellence in our youth that anytime I hear somebody talk about Gen Z, I'm always back to this story, and I've never been able to verify it, but you realize that the military did a survey of America's youth and tried to figure out whether they were fit to serve. And they found them to be lazy, revelers, malnourished, not interested in public service or anybody but themselves. And that survey was conducted in 1938. So I think that we spend a lot of time as old farts, sort of looking at the youth of America and going, well, you just don't have it as hard as I did or whatever. You know what? I have great faith in the youth of America. The only thing that really worries me kind of goes back to Colonel Riley's remarks. I'm worried a little bit about the future of our force. Are we really so in love with these gold-plated war machines that we're buying? And I'm as guilty of that as the next guy, because I was part of the branch of the armed forces that has everything from nuclear submarines up to satellites in space to stealth fighters in the air. And we created a couple of ships that really were kind of lemons. I mean, the DDG-1000, I'm sorry, that thing just didn't live up to its potential. Yeah, Captain Kirk was the captain of that ship. So let's face it, we have got to get more responsible in our procurement process, both inside and outside of the Pentagon. And that is what keeps me up at night. Are we really spending our tax dollars on defense in a responsible manner? And that would be my biggest worry. Are we really doing it in a way that will prepare us for the conflicts that are ahead? And I think we kind of stink at that strategy stuff. But I speak too plainly to be anything greater than a 2-star, so I didn't get a chance at the table. So I'll leave it there. Colonel, Mike, my friend.
Thank you, Woody.
Yeah,
appreciate that. It's a great question, and it's a very all-encompassing type of question, too. There's a lot of avenues to go, and I think you handled that admirably. So, Admiral, yeah, you like that? I could do that all night. Yeah. So what keeps me up at night is legacy thinking. There's a view so there's an old adage that all the old generals want to fight the last war. I see too much legacy thinking. I see too many legacy programs and platforms, like you talked about. Okay? I see too much ideology instead of actual work in determining what's gonna work in our next fight, and how do we develop the force to do that. So what keeps me up at night from the DoD perspective is legacy thinking, frankly. How do we change that? Well, we need new leadership, frankly, and that's going to take some time. That is just going to take some time. You can talk political leadership. You talked about electing. I think we have an election coming up soon, right? So that is how we handle things in a democracy. That's how we handle things in a democracy, is we vote. That is the way we affect change as citizens. We need to have different thinking and different ideology within the DoD to get us focused in the right direction. So that's I would say from a big perspective. From the individual perspective, my purpose, I talked with you about your purpose, right? My purpose is to develop ethical leaders of character for the state and nation, period. That's what I do now, okay? And everything that I do is surrounding that. So we need to have people of purpose. Young men and women and older men and women that are willing to take responsibility for their communities, for their families, for their country in real and tangible ways, and to be a part of that. And I think if we do that, then we have a chance. I believe in America, so I think we'll do that. Thank you.
Mike? Before I'll turn it back over to you, sir, but before I knock this off, I do want to do something that I try to do in front of every audience. Number one, thanks for being here. Thanks for asking such great questions. I want to just say, God bless all of you, and may God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Mike, Woody, thanks for your comments. We appreciate your candor, your honesty, and your perception. And I think what I have seen is that a lot of the topics that we got into tonight really are appropriate to the next one of these discussions where we talk about the future of the United States and where we want to go. What are we willing to do as a country, and how do we get there? So maybe you can come back and take your Mutt and Jeff show on the road. Scott, you want to finish off, please?
All right, where are we? Is this it right here?
Yep.
Okay. All right, good. Thank you, General. I appreciate it. And thanks again to both of you. Weren't they great? Didn't they do a great job? Yeah. Well, here's what we're going to do. We want to express our thanks.